Hello, wider listeners. It is once again that time of the week. What time of the week is it? Well, it's that time of the week where we dig underneath the headlines. We look at what's going on at the international, national, statewide, and local level from a deft, leftist lens, and quite generally call out the establishment on its BS. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University. Now, I'm joined today by a fella who's going to be coming on the show fairly regularly. One would hope. You might recognize his voice already. He's been doing some music here on Whitmer, and as I understand, you also do some work with the Western Herald. Is that correct?
Yes, that is. Hello, everyone. My name is William Walton, although you probably know me as Billy Walton. I have the radio show just before this, and I am also the news editor at the Western Herald.
Well, thank you, because we need that young blood. My decrepit socialist bones just can't keep up. Yeah. So, we've got a lot to talk about on the program today. A lot of local issues to cover. I thought I'd go ahead and start off. I apologize, William. We didn't have time to kind of brief you on some of the issues and topics we'll be talking about today. So, going to be kind of going in cold. Hopefully nothing too obscure or wonky for you. I actually did want to bring up this story. It's very important and very timely given the anniversary that we currently have. I'm going to read a couple excerpts from this. Democracy Now! Did some really good reporting on this the other day, and it's actually a follow-up to a story that we were talking about last week about a breakthrough in peace talks in Afghanistan between the Taliban and the U.S. government. The current provisional government, not necessarily as included as one would or should think, but let's go straight from this very credible journalistic source, and I'll read from it a little bit, and then I think we'll kind of go into conversation. Again, the broader context of Afghanistan, as we all know. It's the longest running war in American history, and it's one that we are only still in through, we've talked about this on the show a lot before. The Taliban actually surrendered to the United States government almost about a year into the conflict, and what ended up happening through a lot of bureaucracy, through a lot of ineptitude, and through a lot of studies showing very valuable mineral wealth in the Afghan mountains. So that war is now 18 years old. It's old enough to drive a car. It's old enough to buy cigarettes. It's old enough. The Afghanistan war is old enough to go to war, as a matter of fact. If it were a person, it could sign up and join the military. So let's in that context talk about this breaking story that happened just 2 days ago, September 9th. Headline is, "These negotiations have not been about the Afghan people. Trump calls off peace talks with the Taliban." This weekend, President Trump publicly called off a secret meeting at Camp David with the Taliban and the president of Afghanistan that aimed to end the 18-year war, the longest in U.S. history. The United States and Taliban had appeared close to signing an agreement after holding 9 rounds of talks in Doha. But the negotiations took a surprise turn when President Trump suggested a Camp David meeting that included Afghan President Ashraf Ghani, who had not been involved in the previous talks. The United States and Taliban had appeared close to signing an agreement after holding 9 rounds of talks in Doha. This is just kind of expanding on what happened there. But the negotiations took a surprise turn when President Trump suggested a Camp David meeting that included the Afghan president. The New York Times reports Trump wanted the deal to be announced at Camp David so that he would be perceived as the deal maker who pulled the peace agreement together. It kind of reminds me of, when the when he was negotiating actively with the North Korean government and Kim Jong-un about a year and a half back. Definitely, and especially if we, following up a lot of broken promises, a lot of, not as much progress as one would think or hope for. And the progress that has been made, you could really kind of give more of the credit to President Moon of South Korea for his work. But it is very calculated. It seems like, William, maybe you can speak to this, without getting the kind of spectacle that he wanted from this, it seemed like he kind of just found a reason to get out of it. And I'll give you the official reason in a minute, but I don't know, what are some of your thoughts on this?
So my thoughts on this are more just thoughts about the president in general. I think the president wants it to be by him, about him, for him, at all times, and if it's not, he doesn't see the point. I'm not sure that President Trump fully understands, well, I'm not sure anyone fully understands, but certainly not Trump, the situation in Afghanistan, in the Middle East at large. I think Trump looks at this and he sees something that he knows Americans are not fond of and that he can potentially bring an end to, and it'll be about him. But when it's not, why bother?
Yeah, I think that it kind of brings into a broader discussion of like how President Trump uses foreign policy. We did just see in the last week, and this is good news. John Bolton, the warmongering walrus, got his walking papers. I don't care who you are. This is good news. It's one of the, we'll put that in the very small stack of good decisions that President Trump has made. President Jack-o'-lantern, as we sometimes call him on the show, which is good because it's seasonal. We're getting into autumn. Anyway. I think like what is important to note here is, he campaigned as an anti-interventionist. He was very critical of the way that Afghanistan and Iraq been handled under both the George W. Bush and Obama administrations. Something that I think is really important, though, is like, I'll see like a lot of kind of, right libertarians or whatnot on the internet talking about, he's been anti-interventionist this whole time. He's a anti-war. Something that you need to really understand in the numbers since Trump took office. And while we've always been very critical of drone warfare in general, so, some of the civilian casualty rates under Obama were pretty appalling. All of those have shot up under Trump. So, whatever you want to say about the man, to say that he's like a peacemaker or that he's trying to reel back these wars, that's a ridiculous sentiment, and I think this only speaks to it. Again, he found a reason, he found an out. In this particular case, it was a very it was a low-yield terrorist attack in Afghanistan. And the important part to note about that is, yes, there should not be active fighting going on while you're in peace negotiations, and that's true of both sides. But at the same time, we had, I believe it was Mike Pompeo, who was actively bragging about, decimating, Taliban and Afghan soldiers concurrently, like at the same time this terrorist attack happened. So, it's hypocritical. It's, do as I say, not do as I do. We're getting back to where we're starting with that. His anti-interventionist rhetoric, the buck really stops at, when we see what is actually good for the people. Because, you can say, he hasn't started too many new wars, although, gosh, if John Bolton didn't try to start one in Venezuela. But the actual brutality of the wars that we are currently fighting has shot up dramatically. And I think, the most telling part of his character, we bragged about selling, U.S. arms and munitions to Saudi Arabia. He sees war as a business transaction. And if you don't see that, you need to pay more attention. I'd say, again, it's all about, there is an actual focus on the people, and even a lot of the critics of these talks say that the actual Afghan people have not been brought in. I don't want to eat up too much time talking about it, but I don't know. What are some of your thoughts on like the whole kind of the intersection of interventionist foreign policy with the fact that we have an administration that is just on every level has a foreign policy that is far more brutal than its predecessor?
Yeah, so I think something, I mentioned this previously, but interesting to note is that I'm young enough, I'm 20 years old, that all of my memories are of a world in which we've been in Afghanistan, and Iraq for that matter, in the Middle East at large. And what I worry about with Trump is that not only was the war in Afghanistan and Iraq a foreign policy blunder in the first place, and one that limited our credibility as a country in the world, but now we have someone with no credible foreign policy experience and who's shown himself to prefer heavy-handed measures, throwing his weight around, to a softer touch in charge of the ship, a ship that was already off course. This would be akin to the Titanic. It's heading towards the iceberg and deciding to steer into it, is I think what we're seeing here.
Well, climate change will take care of that. But no, that's some of that millennial gallows humor. Anyway, I think a really important thing to understand about Afghanistan too. This is a country that's been at war, not even for the 18 years, like basically the last 40 years. Most Afghan citizens, most people who are alive today, vast majority have only a living memory of a country at war, because before the United States there was of course the Soviet Union, and then in between that there was a heck of a lot of infighting. The Taliban didn't take power until fairly recently, before the U.S. invaded in 2001. So relatively speaking on historical terms. So we have a people who, I think like us, you have like generations of people who have known nothing but war. And obviously, our current president probably couldn't, win a spelling bee, much less, bring peace to a generational conflict. It's probably not gonna either understand, care, or want to understand about any of those things. Again, in those situations where he has made like a correct foreign policy decision, has tried to broker peace, it's always been from a kind of very self-serving perspective. And in this case, you're talking about thousands, millions really of Afghani civilians who, again, this isn't the first time the U.S. has dropped the football, the bucket, whatever metaphor you want to use, when it comes to brokering an actual ceasefire or peace deal in the Afghan conflict. It's just this time, it's with an extra layer of kind of cruelty and narcissism, So I think, any other thoughts on that, William? I think we'll go ahead and we'll take a break, and then we'll hop on to another topic. But
I think you've hit on everything I was thinking as well.
All right. Okay, everybody, y'all listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. Keep your dial locked. We got much more coming up on the way. Keep your dial locked. It's the only source for political revolution.
Lighter is. Lighter is.
I ain't getting out of bed today. 9 to 5 to survive. There's gotta be a better way than waking up.
Lighter is. Lighter is.
Living lonely is a life that I've been living.
Lighter is. Lighter is Radio Evolution.
Voting is important. From deciding Kalamazoo's best drunk food to picking the fan favorite for Wider's Battle of the Bands, voting allows people to voice their opinions and change their world. To vote for offices such as mayors, senators, and the president takes a little more than a link to a Google Forms survey. Before you vote, you have to register. This can be done in person, by mail, and, in many states, online. For more information, you can point your favorite web browser to vote.gov.
Hello, everyone. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So I want to thank William for stopping by. You will be hearing more from him in the future. Again, does work with the Western Herald as news editor, and he will be joining us regularly to come on and talk about the stuff. Actually, you know, while before I hop into the next story, let me make a couple of quick announcements, especially now that all of the students are back. Welcome back, students. If you are a particularly outspoken individual out there on campus or in the Kalamazoo community, and you think you've got some things to say about what is going on in our city, our state, our country, our world, then hit us up. We are consistently and constantly looking for new co-hosts to come on and voice their opinions. Or, you know what, if you're part of an RSO here on campus that does social justice work, we'd love to have you on to talk about what you're doing. So, yeah, if you are interested in being one of our rotating co-hosts, hit us up. The Hoodrat Strategist radio program. You can find us on Facebook. That is probably the best way to get a hold of us. Also, a quick little thing, just while I'm thinking about it, and I think I should probably say this on every show between now and November 5th, that whole voting registration thing. Students, I want y'all to really think consciously about voting in the local elections coming up. Why is that? You know, well, I won't make you split hairs or have to make a tough choice. If you feel more connected to your hometown and you want to vote absentee there, which, by the way, in Michigan, you can now do easier than ever, then please, by all means, engage in your local politics. But if you feel more connected to the city of Kalamazoo, I would highly recommend you re-register. You should think about re-registering here in the city, because we've got a very important election coming up. We're going to be picking out a brand new mayor, and we're also going to be picking out 3 brand new city commissioners. We've got a completely open docket. Unless you count Patrice. Excuse me. Unless you count Patrice, who of course is appointed following Shannon Sykes' resignation. Sorry, gotta do some vocal exercises or something. My tongue is running over itself a lot. But anyway, sorry. What I meant to say, this is going to be a very important local election, so if you're a WMU student and you feel connected to the city of Kalamazoo, I'd highly recommend re-register, vote locally, because again, it's going to be a big one. It's going to be a very important election. Speaking of local elections, let's go ahead and go into a very important local story. We've got a candidacy announcement. This is from yesterday. Kalamazoo County Board Chairperson Julie Rogers announces run for Michigan House. And this would be to pick up John Hoadley's old seat. John Hoadley, of course, is currently going to be running for Congress. Now that Michigan, if you didn't know, the Michigan House has term limits. I believe it's either 8 or 10 years. So he is literally been there too long. So now he's going to be running for Congress. But it's already a very competitive primary. Hold on just a second. As I was saying, it's already looking to be a very competitive primary. And that's for the Michigan House seat, that is. So let me go ahead and read from the article. This is written by Brad Devereaux, and it was published yesterday. Kalamazoo County Board Chairperson Julie Rogers, a Democrat, plans to announce her bid for state representative in Michigan's 60th district. She said in an email message to the Kalamazoo Gazette. Rogers is serving her 4th term as Kalamazoo County Commissioner and was elected by her peers to serve as chairperson of the board in January 2019. The county official said she will announce her 2020 candidacy for the Michigan legislature at 5:15 p.m. Tuesday, September 10th at the Kalamazoo Public Library, 315 South Rose Street. Rogers is the 3rd Democratic County Commissioner to announce plans to seek the 60th District seat, currently held by State Representative John Hoadley, Kalamazoo Democrat. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but let's go through the rest of the article here. Vice Chairperson Tracy Hall announced in May her intention to run for the seat in 2020, and Commissioner Stephanie Moore, who chaired the county board prior to Rogers, announced in June her plans to seek election to the seat. The district includes the city of Kalamazoo and Kalamazoo Township. I am the only candidate in this race with healthcare expertise, Rogers said in a prepared statement. As a physical therapist at our local hospital, I have always advocated for my patients. I have seen firsthand the unnecessary suffering and pain caused when patients are forced to forego or stop care due to a lack of adequate insurance or to an arbitrary limit to their Medicare coverage enacted by Congress. Healthcare is a right. Everyone should have access to treatment, affordable medication, and mental health care. We can and should do better when it comes to taking care of each other. Rogers is serving in her 6th term on the National Association of Counties Health Steering Committee and was recently appointed as vice chairperson. She was also elected to serve in an at-large position on the Michigan Association of Counties Board of Directors. Building relationships is key in government, she said. If elected, I am ready to hit the ground running in Lansing and work together with colleagues from all over the state to help move Kalamazoo and Michigan forward. I am indebted to former Representative Mary Brown, Ed LaForge, Alexander Lipsey, Robert Jones, Sean McCann, and John Hoadley, who have all mentored me at one time or another. I truly appreciate the hard work and dedication they've given our community and hope to continue their tradition of extraordinary public service. Another of Rogers' priorities will focus on protecting the environment, she said. For over a decade, I've helped clean up and rehabilitate contaminated properties in ways that create jobs and foster economic growth while serving on the Kalamazoo County Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, Rogers said. Rogers said she championed the county's first sustainability policy and saw it implemented as a permanent part of the annual budget. She said she also knows that the right to safe, clean water is non-negotiable. So I'll go on. She talks a little bit more about her platform. You can read that at the article. And I will, that is over on MLive. Kalamazoo County Board Chairperson Julie Rogers announces run for Michigan House. I do want to mention a couple of other things, though. Here's what she said she would do. Rogers said she will continue her advocacy for civil rights. She served many years on Ascension Borges Health's Diversity Council and championed equitable policies to address health disparities. She said she will fight for reproductive rights, work to amend the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to include protections for LGBTQ Michiganders, and champion equitable state policies that are fair for everyone. Another Kalamazoo County Commissioner, Democrat Christine Morse, is also seeking election to state office next year. Morse announced in July her intention to run for Republican State Representative Brant Iden's seat, representing Michigan House District 61. Republican Bronwyn Haltom has also announced a run to succeed Iden, who is term limited. The 61st District includes the city of Portage, Oshtemo, Texas, Prairie Round, and Schoolcraft Townships, and the villages of Schoolcraft and Vicksburg and Kalamazoo County. Those are fairly conservative areas, but there is a lot of traction you can gain in places, particularly, I think, Portage, Oshtemo, Texas, and Schoolcraft have their own kind of progressive constituencies. But that's going a little bit into the after game quarterbacking or whatnot. So let's talk about something that I don't know if it necessarily irks me or how I feel about it, but I think we have 3 different county commissioners for Kalamazoo County who are all going to be running campaigns for the 60th district seat in the Michigan House of Representatives. Now here's a concern. This comes from somebody who knows what goes into campaigning, and I'll just leave it at that. Again, I'm not going to talk about that on my show, but I know a little bit about what it is like to campaign, and I mean, so do all of these folks as well. They've run more than I have, that's for sure. But what does happen is you just necessarily, there are only 24 hours in a day. You can only devote so much time to other projects or other responsibilities. And those things, while they won't necessarily suffer, you won't be given your 100% as a county commissioner if you're actively seeking to run for higher office. Now, of course, this isn't to say, this is how a lot of these things go. It's almost, particularly here in Kalamazoo, but, this is how local politics work in most places in America, is you serve on a local board, then you seek a statewide office, and then it's like you kind of, like any other job, you seek a promotion, more or less. It's just, in this case, your ability to get promoted is directly related to how many votes you can get from the population you're trying to represent. So, my concern, though, is you have 3 people from the same legislative body all vying for this seat. That energy, there is going to be less energy just all around. And that's not to detract. Actually, all 3 of these people are, really incredible public servants. I've given them props. I've critiqued them all to some extent on my show. I've given them props on my show. But again, it's a very intense juggling act. And particularly with a lot of the changes that have happened recently to the county commission. And by the way, I just found out about this on my bus ride home. Paul Haig has resigned, I believe, as of September 6th. That is District 2, and that is a district that represents much of the Millwood neighborhood, much of the Vine neighborhood, much of the Westnedge Hill neighborhood. And so we've got a county commission that's already, they're going to have to find a replacement for Paul. Jen Aniano recently got appointed there, as we were talking about. So we've got brand new county commissioners. We've got a new county commission. We don't even know who it's going to be yet. They're going to need to temporarily appoint somebody for that District 2 seat. We've got a county commission that is completely in flux right now. And particularly, I think after this local election coming up, you're going to start seeing Stephanie Moore and Julie Rogers and Tracy Hall really kicking up, putting the accelerator on their campaigns for, the state house. And it's going to be interesting to see how, again, three people from the same legislative body, all vying for the same position, how that is going to play out in the day-to-day activities of our city government. Because again, those functions are very vital. I tell people the reason you should care about local politics, even if you are, rightly cynical about national ones. Hey, we live in the heart of the capitalist imperial empire. Local politics affect you day to day in a way that national politics most of the time don't. So, I say most of the time is, hey, there's some people getting hit by federal policy right now, i.e. ICE. Anyway, that's another topic. But what happens in local politics really affects us on a day-to-day basis, and I am a bit concerned that we're going to have a lot of really new, fresh faces, again, with a lot of new ideas, but don't understand the mechanics of kind of being in the county commission, alongside the most experienced county commissioners who are going to basically be distracted with their individual campaign runs. So, just a word of caution. Again, I would be genuinely happy to see any of them take that seat, but the fact that we've got three people from the same county board running for this one seat, it could bring some problems. And I think with that, I will leave that at that, as it were. But while we are on the topic of local news, here's just a real quick one, duty to warn. And this is just a quick announcement, but I will talk about it a little bit more. So just be careful out there, everybody in Kalamazoo. There's a no contact advisory that was issued for the Kalamazoo River after a sewage spill. City officials are asking the public to avoid a stretch of Kalamazoo River after a sewage release. The stretch of river under the no contact advisory is located between the Kings Highway and Mill Street bridges, Kalamazoo city officials said. The release of sewage into a storm sewer remains ongoing, with crews working to fix the broken sewer pipe responsible, the city said. Public service workers found the release into the storm sewer at the corner of Cameron and East Stockridge around 5 p.m. Monday, September 9th. So, again, this is kind of downtown. If you go to Arcadia Creek, or you go to Arcadia Ales, which I can't even remember. Are they still open? A few shows back, we talked about how they, much like Yoshi, they were committing some tax fraud, or no, not tax fraud. I'm sorry, just they weren't paying their taxes. Yeah, which I guess in some way you could say is quite fraudulent by its own right. But yeah, I really just wanted, that's a very concrete warning. I mean, a lot of times we warn you about capitalism, we warn you about these abstract, more abstract concepts, foreign policy. Warning, stay out of the water between Kings Highway and Mill Street, because it's full of doo-doo. And while I'm trying to be a little funny and cute about it, this actually is it's a problem. We need to make sure, as a city, that we do not allow our swimming, our river water to be contaminated with human waste. Compared to what the Kalamazoo River was like in the 70s, we've gone leaps and bounds between making sure it's not just a glowing, flowing trash fire. But let us not go back to the bad old days via that with which we flush down the toilet. I think in a future episode, I'll try to see if I can get an interview with the drain commissioner, talk about some of these issues, but see what we can do to prevent something like this from happening in the future. But I really just wanted to get that out there, especially some of you students who are hanging out downtown. Maybe you're having a little too much fun in downtown Kalamazoo. Somebody's like, hey, let's jump in the water. Don't do it. Don't do it. Just don't. You can get really sick, especially like sewage contaminated water. It can give you pink eye. It can give you possibly dysentery, but a lot of very bad health conditions if you interact with that contaminated river. So with that, let's why don't we go ahead? Let's take a quick early break before we start on a new topic. Y'all listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Interested in underground hip-hop. Here is a complete disc jockey show with all the modern pace of today's exciting radio.
Listen here on
Saturday night
from 7 to 10.
You can't go wrong. There's one important element missing, however. That's you.
Hip-hop epic show.
Saturday night.
I mean, DJs bring me young, play that real live show. The hip-hop epic show.
I know you're gonna dig it.
Yo, I'm talking about the hip-hop epic show. The DJ bring me young. Transmitting live.
Saturday night.
WIDR Kalamazoo.
Bouncing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Calling all Western Michigan University RSOs. Do you have a media project that needs funding? Whiter and the Student Media Group is here to share some wealth. All you need to do is submit an allocation request form on the Student Media Group website. This can be located at ose-smg.wixsite.com/Student Media Group, or find more information on widerfm.org under the Allocations tab. The Student Media Group is here to spread light onto Western Michigan student groups. You can find upcoming info about Wider FM and the Student Media Group through Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So let's go ahead. I want to talk a little bit about, while we are on the topic of contaminated water, there's an article that dropped from MLive that is extremely disconcerting. It's a map that shows Michigan schools, daycares with contaminated well water. And I'll go ahead and read it and then maybe talk about a couple of the ones that are closest to Kalamazoo. These are fairly alarming. It was written by Garrett Elson. It was published on September 9th. At least trace levels of toxic fluorochemicals called PFAS have been found at 60 schools, daycares, and Head Start centers drawing groundwater from private wells in Michigan. The contamination data comes from a 2018 statewide testing effort undertaken by the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EGLE, formerly the DEQ, to search for PFAS chemicals in all public drinking water supplies. The map below plots each school with any PFAS detection in its well water, both in the 2018 data as well as follow-up 2019 testing data for 26 schools and child care centers. The state has done quarterly follow-up testing at any school, daycare, or Head Start on a well if the PFAS detections exceeded 10 parts per trillion last year. PFAS are a large group of synthetic industrial chemicals made with a varying number of carbon and fluorine atoms. For decades, the chemicals have been highly prized by industry for their durability and power to repel water, grease, and withstand high temperatures. Michigan is at the forefront of a growing national effort to discover and reduce exposure to the highly persistent contaminants in drinking water and the environment. The state tested about 1,380 public water systems in 460 schools, daycares, and Head Start centers last year. The schools tested were those using well water, although there's potentially PFAS in the water at any school hooked to one of the 62 municipal systems with at least trace levels of PFAS detection. In those cases, regulators are focusing their efforts on the water treatment plant that serves the wider community. So let me go ahead, let's zoom in and see the closest ones to Kalamazoo. Excuse me. So up near Kalamazoo, St. Early Learning Center, there's about 50 students there. That's that was detected. That sample was taken on the 18th of June this year. Total PFAS parts per trillion, 13 parts per trillion. Over in Battle Creek, over at the Learning Zone, there's about 70 kids there. Last sample was taken 2018. That was 5 parts per trillion. Over in Vicksburg, the Chapman Memorial Church, it's about 200 kids there. There was 34 parts per trillion. It's not good. And at the Kids Time Daycare Center over in Athens, Michigan, there was 23 parts per trillion. That serves about 79 students. Last sample was June 18th. I picked those 4 out in particular because I believe those are all the ones within kind of radio range of the show. But again, you can find the full map at this article. Map shows Michigan schools, daycares with contaminated well water. Kind of the way this chart breaks down to the orange sites it's kind of yellow, orange, and red. And like the red is with the strongest concentration, and yellow is those that are lightest. But again, yellow is still above safe limits. So of the 4 schools I mentioned, Battle Creek is yellow, but the rest of them are orange. And again, the one closest to us, I'll just repeat that real quick. The one closest to us over at Hickory Corners is the Gull Lake Schools 40th Street Early Learning Center. So, it's, again, systemically, let's talk a little bit just where PFAS come from. It's industrial runoff, chemicals from, again, they had a huge problem with it in parchment. It was a lot of runoff and contamination from the shut down paper mills, shut down industrial sites that leaked into the groundwater and are now poisoning our citizens, and particularly our children, who are most vulnerable to these chemicals. I think that's part of the reason why this article is written in this way, to show like which sites, which preschools where the most vulnerable population goes are being potentially poisoned by this chemical cocktail. And again, it's a result of years of industrial pollution where, and here's the problem when you really get to the kind of, capitalist critique here. It's like, yeah, you can make measures that set standards going forward. You can say that, companies can't, put this X, Y, or Z chemical into the environment. But it doesn't really do anything to, one, clean up the mess that was left behind, nor does it hold any of these corporations accountable. These corporations can get away with shutting down factories, which again is bad for the economy, destroys families, destroys livelihoods, while simultaneously not being held responsible for the messes that they leave behind. They're not held financially responsible, and what ends up happening is that their pollution that just gets to sit and fester and eventually leak out ends up getting into our groundwater, so that we end up paying the price. Again, a lot of people talk about, socialism for the wealthy. Again, that's not actually how a lot of that works. You can read Karl Marx. He's got some good ideas about this. But there is definitely a sense of, if you want to talk about, like, kind of reverse socialism in this sense, it's, the benefits are privatized, while the costs, the harm, is socialized. That's why we criticize capitalism so much on this show. Everybody out there. So from that, again, this is a problem all over the state. I'd really recommend everybody, check it out if you get the chance. So with that, let's move to a different part of the state. Kind of wrap up a couple of different stories that we were talking about. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in Jackson. A lot of people are angry at the governor right now. The ban on vaping, which as of press time, I didn't have time to talk about on my show last week, even though it happened right during our show, that story dropped. Apparently, she's got friends in high places who agree with her. There was a story that just dropped today about how the Trump administration is going to be pursuing a similar ban nationwide. I didn't have time, but I'm going to try to track down some people in the vaping community to talk about how this is damaging their business. There's this whole argument about how flavored vape juice, it gets the kids hooked on nicotine, when really 9 times out of 10, I've noticed with vaping, although I don't vape personally, it's helped a lot of my friends get off of cigarettes and tobacco usage. And, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done into, like, the actual health effects of vaping. I don't think that vaping is quote-unquote healthy, but it is probably healthier than smoking tobacco cigarettes. And I also do think it is a bit unfair. Just because a vape juice is flavored doesn't mean it's being marketed to children. Now, the tobacco industry in the late 80s and early 90s came under a lot of scrutiny and legislation because they were directly targeting to children. The Joe Camel cartoons, candy cigarettes, the whole shebang. But as far as anybody in the industry and any of the actual public can tell, one, you can't buy any of this stuff unless you're 18 anyway. And again, most of the people that I personally know and a lot of people coming out of the woodwork to speak out against this are people who use it as basically a stop smoking cigarette tobacco aid. I really think that this decision by Gretchen Whitmer and now apparently President Trump is going to backfire, and it's going to end up getting a lot more people addicted to cigarettes. A lot of people actually think that might be, quote unquote, to quote the Joker, all part of the plan, because Gretchen Whitmer actually did take some tobacco industry donations during her run, and Trump is just a cocktail of every negative and gross business interest in this entire country. So, yeah, that might be part of the plan. Get the kids back on those cigarettes. Definitely not on a not healthy, but probably healthier alternative. So before we go to the next story about what's going on in Jackson, Michigan, I want to give a big thank you. The music that you're currently hearing, our background music, is provided by local band Quantum Fleek. Check them out on Facebook. This is from a recording they did 2 years ago right here in the Wider Studios. So again, thanks guys for letting me use your music to make my my news and my calling out of the BS all the much more funky. So speaking of things that are not funky whatsoever, this was published earlier today, this morning. Governor Whitmer is asked to remove Jackson County Sheriff Rand a third time. And oh boy, we're going to go into why people are calling for Governor Rand to be fired, and it's pretty gross. So Governor Gretchen Whitmer, for a third time, has been asked to wield her power and fire Jackson County Sheriff Stephen Rand. The latest removal request... Hold on. Sorry. Excuse me. The latest removal request comes from Pinckney-based attorney James Fett, who represents Jackson County Sheriff Lieutenant Tommy Schutte in his ongoing civil rights and discrimination lawsuit against Rand in Jackson County. Schutte, who is hearing impaired, secretly recorded Rand making a host of demeaning statements about women and black, gay, Hispanic, disabled, and overweight people. Whitmer, and now here's where it gets interesting. A lot of you are probably not going to like our quote-unquote progressive AG after I tell you this, but let's hear the full story. I'm kind of on the fence about this myself. Whitmer, on the advice of Attorney General Dana Nessel's office, has twice rejected the previous requests for Rand's removal. Nessel's office determined the requests, the first submitted by the Jackson County Commission while former Governor Rick Snyder held office in February 2018, and another filed by Jackson Mayor Derek Davies in March, didn't meet the procedural or legal requirements for removal of an elected official. Fett believes his request is different. An official's intemperate statements, including ugly epithets, while deeply offensive, do not by themselves constitute willful neglect of duty or official misconduct, and do not provide a basis for removal, Deputy AG Kelly Keenan wrote in a response to the Jackson County Commissioner's request. Now, obviously, I've got some ideas about that. People who are overtly racist, homophobic, transphobic, etc., have no place in public office. If that isn't in the law, and if that isn't in the book, it should be. The fact that that's not grounds for removal as is kind of ridiculous. So, one, that law definitely needs to be changed, in my opinion, or frankly, the progressives of Jackson run this guy out of town or vote him out, or public pressure, all y'all out there. It's a very powerful and important tool. However, goes on to say that they still think they have a case. Fett agrees. He says the basis for his removal request is not the offensive language, but the hostile environment Rand created and discrimination he imposed. This, Fett claims, rises to official misconduct and willful neglect of duty. The state law allows removal of an elected public official only for extortion, habitual drunkenness, a conviction related to drunkenness, a felony conviction in office, official misconduct, or willful neglect of duty. Further, the elected official must be provided a detailed copy of the charges, verified by the affidavit of the party making them that he believes the charges to be true, and given a chance to respond. It's not clear if Fett delivered a copy of the removal request to Rand, but he said the statements that support his claims were presented to Rand or his attorney as part of the ongoing lawsuit. All that's left is to meet the requirement for removal, Fett said, is for Whitmer to conduct a hearing and give Rand a chance to respond. vet sent his removal request to Whitmer's legal counsel, Mark Totten, on September 9th. It's unclear when the governor might rule on vet's request. I was actually just riding through Jackson today. Again, I don't know if I mentioned it at the top of the show. Part of the reason we started a little late was literally just getting home from Detroit. I had to go to court. Had to do with that civil disobedience I did out there a couple weeks ago on behalf of Cosecha. So actually rode through Jackson. Didn't see any racist county sheriffs, but frankly, nobody in Jackson should see a racist county sheriff. Say that 5 times fast, ladies. All y'all at home. Anyway. So yeah, that's the story with that. And let's do... I actually want to deep dive on this a little bit more. And I encourage everybody to look up this article because it's just a treasure trove of information. But there's this recently published article that, again, they did their homework for this one. It goes into Michigan's economy under Trump versus Obama, and it's a deep dive county level look at wage and employment trends. So I'll go ahead and read the preface, and then I'm going to look into try to pull up the stats for Kalamazoo County here. So when Vice President Mike Pence spoke last month before the Detroit Economic Club, he highlighted President Donald Trump's economic agenda. He promised to enact an across-the-board income tax reduction, Pence said. He promised to eliminate regulations. He promised to pursue great trade deals for our country and to unleash an energy revolution. More like a counter-revolution, but anyway. 3 years later, President Donald Trump delivered. Yeah, well, what did he deliver exactly? Okay, anyway, going down. No question, Michigan's economy is the strongest that it's been in years. I would say, tell that to the homeless, but yeah, let's be just as far as things go. Yes, the overall economy is stronger. I probably wouldn't speak in those terms, me being the cynical Marxist, I'd say it's definitely less bad, but we still have the crushing dictatorship of capital. Anyway, it's unclear how much credit Trump deserves, considering the trajectory of growth has been about the same since the end of the recession a decade ago. There are other caveats too, experts say. Presidents have less control over the economy than many assume. And this is something we like to bring up a lot on the show too. President is basically a figurehead. If you want to know who controls the economy, look at all of the corporations that they represent. Anyway, there's a lag time between governmental actions and changes in the economy, and it often takes hindsight to recognize the wisdom or folly of presidential policies. People reward or punish politicians on the basis of what's happening to the economy lately, even if those politicians have not really been responsible for the economy's ups and downs, says Charles Ballard, a Michigan State University economist. In the case of Trump, he inherited an economy that already had been growing steadily for the past 7 years, Ballard said. It was Obama, for better or worse, who inherited an economy that was in horrifyingly bad shape, and Trump then inherited an economy in pretty good shape. Again, relatively speaking, I would take umbrage with some of the assertions this article is making. What does a quote-unquote strong economy look like? GDP does not make sure that homeless people are in houses or have food on their plates. It doesn't. GDP does not translate to general quality of life for the working class. But let's not get too distracted here. Anyway, if you look at the economic charts, you can't really eyeball them and say that's where Trump came to office, Ballard added. Michael Lefebvre, a fiscal policy expert for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, a free market think tank in Midland, so it's hard to know if or how the economy would be performing differently if Hillary Clinton was elected in 2016. It's difficult with the counterfactual, he said. With Trump's tax cuts and regulatory rollbacks, would we have slipped into a recession, Lefebvre said? Or conversely, Trump's trade war could be dragging down the economy, Lefebvre said. We might actually be in a recession now and not know it. In fact, when looking at measures of economic growth in Michigan, increases in the final years of the Obama presidency outpaced the first years under Trump, based on federal statistics. For instance, Michigan employment increased by about 100 111,300 jobs in the first 30 months of the Trump presidency. That compares to almost 205,000 in the last 30 months of the Obama administration. 2. The state added about 17,600 manufacturing jobs in the first 30 months under Trump, compared to about 36,000 in the last 30 months under Obama. 3. Michigan unemployment rate was 4.9 when Trump took office. It's currently 4.3. In the last 30 months of the Obama presidency, the unemployment rate went from 7% to 4.9. So while the unemployment rate is overall lower under the last 30 months of the Obama presidency, the unemployment rate went down more dramatically. Now, I want to give a warning. The way that the unemployment rate is calculated at the federal level is very problematic and basically just a couple of the problems with it. It will discount people who are out of the workforce, who are not actively seeking work, and it does not also include people who are cripplingly underemployed. So the actual unemployment number is significantly higher than what is on paper according to the federal record. Number 4. Michigan's average weekly wage rose 3.4% during the first 2 years under Trump and was $1,078 for the first quarter of 2019. The average weekly wage rose 7.6% during the last 2 years of Obama's presidency. Wow. By the way, the $1,078 weekly wage, I don't know who in my listening audience makes that. That's about my monthly wage, actually. So, yeah, those of you who are making that average, hey, it's help some folks out. Anyway. And then number 5, Michigan's GDP grew 7.7% in the first 2 years under Trump compared to 9.1% during the last 2 years under Obama. One measure where Trump's numbers look better is median wages, the number where half earn more and half earn less. In the most recent numbers, Michigan's median wage was $732.20 a week in May 2018, up 2.6 from May 2017. That's the highest increase since 2005. To be fair, the state's economy during the Obama years had more room to grow because of the recession. On the other hand, the numbers show most of Michigan's recovery occurred under Obama and not Donald Trump. And below, they break it down by county. I'm going to go ahead and go to this map. So in Kalamazoo County, changes in average weekly wages in this first quarter of 2018 to 2019. In Kalamazoo County, average weekly wages in 2018 were $1,047. In 2019, it's $1,100. That is an increase of 5.1%. Let me look up some of the other info that gets brought up here. So, employment in Kalamazoo County. In 2018, there's 118,977 jobs created. 2019, 120,245. That's an increase of 1.1%. Unemployment. Excuse me here. Where is it? Unemployment in Kalamazoo County. And this is actually, they use a slightly different metric here. They are comparing when Obama became president in July 2009 versus July 2019, most recently. So, in July of 2015, looking at the wrong number here. So in January of 2009, okay, I'm sorry, folks. My computer went a little wonky. There we go. So I'll give you the stats from 2015 to 2019. Sorry about that. 2015 is about 113,116 jobs created. More recently, last year we got under Obama was 115,676. Currently, 2019, it's 120,245 jobs, and that is an increase of 4%. Now let's take a look at unemployment rates. Those have shrunk from 2015 to 2019 by about 1%. So it's still reasonably a large number of unemployment. But yeah, if you want to see all the numbers and stats, particularly different counties, check out this really great in-depth article by Julie Mack. It was posted yesterday. Michigan's economy under Trump versus Obama, a county-level look at wage and employment trends. So I think with that, let's go ahead and take a break. We're going to finish out the runway of the show by talking about 9/11, but perhaps not the one most of my listeners are familiar with. Keep your dial locked. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Hi, this is DJ T, and you're listening to 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo, Radio Evolution.
It may not be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Hello, wider listeners. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, the only source for political revolution. Now, as I was talking about before the break, I'm going to spend some of the last time, kind of half hour on the show talking about 9/11, but not necessarily the one that you might immediately be familiar with. I'm talking about not September 11th, 2001, but September 11th, 1973. What is the significance of that date? you may ask? So in this, we're going to talk a little bit, kind of curve around. It's going to be part current events, part history lesson, and be closing out the show with something a little bit different. So I want to start. This is a story from the Latin American Herald Tribune. And the article is titled, Chileans March to Honor Memory of Pinochet's Victims, 46 years after the coup. Just a little bit of reference, and again, the materials I'll be sharing with all y'all kind of go into more depth about it, but basically what happened, Salvador Allende was a democratically elected socialist who did basically behave and govern as a democratic socialist. Think of somebody like Bernard Sanders, but perhaps more explicitly Marxist. And there were some problems going on with the Chilean government beforehand, but what this is in reference to is in 1973, a CIA-backed coup from Augusto Pinochet overthrew that democratically elected government and replaced it with a military authoritarian dictatorship. You'll often see on the internet right-wing trolls invoking Pinochet, talking about throwing commies out of helicopters. That's in reference to some of the cruelty, the abject cruelty that the Pinochet regime, they tortured dissenters, murdered people violently en masse, and famously, the whole helicopter thing, they would take resistance fighters, opposition figures, and put them in a helicopter, fly them out a few hundred miles, and toss them overboard into the ocean from a high and fatal height. So, with that context understood, let's read from this article here. Thousands of people took part on Sunday in a march to the Chilean capital's largest cemetery to pay tribute to the victims of the brutal far-right dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet, 3 days before the 46th anniversary of the coup that overthrew the leftist government of Salvador Allende on September 11th, 1973. The event, convened by social organizations and human rights groups, takes place every year on the weekend before the anniversary of the violent seizure of power that ousted the South American country's first socialist president. The march is usually marked by cases of violent clashes between small clusters of protesters and the police. This year was no exception, and some violence was recorded towards the final stretch of the march, when protesters arrived at the General Cemetery in Santiago's Rosaleta neighborhood. However, the scuffles were less intense than on previous occasions. Isolated groups of hooded men threw Molotov cocktails at anti-riot officers who responded with tear gas and jets of water and arrested at least a dozen people. The protesters began their march from Los Heroes Square and then crossed the Palacio de la Moneda, which was bombed by Pinochet's Air Force during the coup d'etat, before heading to the General Cemetery. Many of the attendees carried photos with faces of the thousands of missing people who disappeared after being detained by the Pinochet regime, which lasted until 1990. Other banners featured slogans such as, "I do not forget, I demand justice," "Where are they?" and "Yesterday's impunity is the cause of today's injustices," as well as messages related to the search for truth and justice. Recoleta Mayor Daniel Judeo, a member of the Communist Party, participated in the first stretch of the march and underlined the importance of combating the denialism of the dictatorship. Pinochet's name has garnered unexpected attention of late due to controversial statements by Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, person I know birds of a feather very much, who praised the Chilean dictator in a harsh verbal attack on former President Michelle Bachelet, who is currently the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Ms. Michelle Bachelet, if the people led by Pinochet have not defeated the left of 1973, including your father, today Chile would look like Cuba, which, by the way, Cuba doesn't look that bad, just as another aside. Bolsonaro said in response to a UN report critical of the human rights situation and police violence in Brazil. Bolsonaro's words put the government of Sebastián Pinera, who has cordial relations with the Brazilian counterpart, in a diplomatic bind, forcing him to express his disagreement in public. Pinera said that he was not on the same page as Bolsonaro on the remarks about Bachelet, especially on a subject as painful as the death of her father, an Air Force general who opposed the coup and who died in prison in Santiago in 1974 after being savagely tortured. Just so y'all understand the cruelty of Bolsonaro's remarks. The right-wing Chilean president, however, avoided explicitly condemning Bolsonaro's allusion to Pinochet, and his action was criticized by the opposition, who considered it too lukewarm. So from there, I want to really put front and center comments and experiences of people who are actually there. And this is a interview with Isabel Allende, who is the niece of Salvador Allende. But in this interview, she talks a little bit of her experiences living through the coup and what it was like to be in Chile during these turbulent times.
One of the Latin America's and the United States' greatest novelists. She's the author of 23 books, including The House of the Spirits, Paula, Daughter of Fortune. Her latest is a novel titled In the Midst of Winter, a love story that still manages to explore the issue into 35. Pinochet seized power.
Documenting the United States intervention in the coup, Secrets of the State, the declassified history of the Chilean dictatorship, features declassified documents from the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, National Security Council, Federal Bureau of Investigation, White House, and State Department. This is the museum director, Javier Estevez.
These documents speak. They speak of everything that was the CIA operation in its moment in 1970, with the knowledge of Nixon and Henry Kissinger to keep Allende from assuming the presidency of the Republic. This is a drama. It really touched the whole world. And of course, you cannot understand how a country like the United States participated so openly in a military coup like the one that happened in Chile.
We are joined by Isabel Allende in our studio. It's great to have you back with us.
It's always great to be here. Hello, Juan.
How are you?
We have a lot to talk about. You have a new book out, In the Midst of Winter, which actually is based here in New York, in Brooklyn, to be exact. But we also wanted to talk, since we haven't spoken on the show since President Trump came to power. I actually wanted to start not here in the U.S., but in Chile. On another September 11th, 1973, you were there in Chile, in your country. Describe what happened and how you saw your country change.
Well, Chile had been the longest and most solid democracy in the continent. And we elected a socialist president that represented a coalition of parties of the left and the center, Salvador Allende. And immediately the CIA and the forces of the right in my country tried to stop him from becoming the president. But eventually that was impossible, and he assumed the presidency in 1970. And the next 3 years were years of political, social, and economic crisis in Chile, because the government was sabotaged by the right and by foreign forces as well. The CIA intervened, and Allende denounced that many times. Nobody believed it, because it was like the story of the bad wolf, you know. The CIA was always blamed for everything in Latin America. The worst thing that you could say to any Latin American is, oh, he's an agent of the CIA. Yeah, that's like the worst insult. And so on September 11th, also a Tuesday, 1973, we had been hearing that there could be a coup, but we didn't know what that was. We had never had that. We woke up to the sound of helicopters and airplanes and tanks in the streets. people who didn't have time to hear the news didn't stay home, and so there were workers in the streets waiting for buses that never came. I went to try to get to my office, and the office was closed.
What were you doing then?
I was a journalist, and the building was closed, was locked, and the streets were empty except for the military tanks and trucks. So during that day, it was all just rumors. We didn't know what was going on. But I saw the bombing of the presidential palace, El Palacio de la Moneda, and we could not believe it. It is as if the armed forces in the United States would bomb the White House. I mean, it's something that we can hardly imagine. And then in a matter of 24 hours, the Congress was dismissed. All political parties were declared illegal. There was no free press, no public opinion, therefore. All institutions were banned, all forms of communication and gathering, except the Catholic Church, that actually played a very important role in defending the people who were victims of repression. Everybody in Chile, me included, thought that this was a sort of historical accident, and in a couple of weeks maybe, the military would call elections and we would go back to democracy. In the minds of everybody was the idea that the president would be possibly Eduardo Frei, who was a Christian Democrat and was a very conservative man, and that would probably be the option.
Your cousin Salvador Allende had died in the past.
He had died in the coup. And so that was something that was in the air. But of course that was not the plan of the military. They had done this to be in power, and they stayed in power for 17 years. The first few years were of brutal repression. Then the repression became much more targeted. So it wasn't as if anybody just could be arrested in the office as it was at the beginning, or in the street, or at home. It was very targeted. By then I was out. I had left my country. And so that is what happened. And it's only much later that after Pinochet left and we have democracy, that all this information about how things happened has come up.
Well, and still information is coming out. The news recently about Pablo Neruda, probably the most famous at that point.
So that was an interview that Democracy Now! Did with Isabel Allende about 2 years ago. And by the way, correction, as they said in the video, cousin, not niece. So I want to do one more thing. We're going to do something a little different here. This is actually... These are the last words of Salvador Allende as he was barricaded inside of his presidential palace before he was murdered by a U.S.-sponsored coup d'etat. It was delivered at 9:10 a.m. on September 11th, 1973. My friends, surely this will be the last opportunity for me to address you. The Air Force has bombed the towers of Radio Portales and Radio Corporación. My words do not have bitterness but disappointment. May they be a moral punishment for those who have betrayed their oath. Soldiers of Chile, titular Commanders-in-Chief Admiral Moreno, who has designated himself Commander of the Navy, and Mr. Mendoza, the despicable general who only yesterday pledged his fidelity and loyalty to the government, and who also has appointed himself Chief of the Carabineros, and that's National Police. Given these facts, the only thing left for me is to say to the workers, I am not going to resign. Placed in a historic transition, I will pray for loyalty to the people with my life. And I say to them that I am certain The seed which we have planted in the good conscience of thousands and thousands of Chileans will not be shriveled forever. They have strength and will be able to dominate us, but social processors can be arrested neither by crime nor force. History is ours, and people make history. Workers of my country, I want to thank you for the loyalty that you always had, the confidence that you deposited in a man who is only an interpreter of great yearnings for justice, who gave his word that he would respect the Constitution and the law and did just that. At this definitive moment, the last moment when I can address you, I wish you to take advantage of the lesson. Foreign capital, imperialism, together with the reaction, created the climate in which the armed forces broke their tradition, the tradition taught by General Schneider and reaffirmed by Commander Araya, victims of the same social sector, which will today be in their homes hoping, with foreign assistance, to retake power, to continue defending their profits and their privileges. I address above all the modest woman of our land, the campesina who believed in us, the worker who labored more, the mother who knew our concern for children. I address professionals of Chile, patriotic professionals, those who days ago continued working against the sedition sponsored by professional associations, class-based associations that also defended the advantages which a capitalist society grants to a few. I address the youth, those who sang and gave us their joy and their spirit of struggle. I address the man of Chile, the worker, the farmer, the intellectual, those who will be persecuted because in our country fascism has been already present for many hours in terrorist attacks, blowing up the bridges, cutting the railroad tracks, destroying the oil and gas pipelines, in the face of the silence of those who had the obligation to protect them. They were committed. History will judge them. Surely Radio Magalenses will be silenced, and the calm metal instrument of my voice will no longer reach you. It does not matter. You will continue hearing it. I will always be next to you. At least my memory will be that of a man of dignity who is loyal to the workers. The people must defend themselves, but they must not sacrifice themselves. The people must not let themselves be destroyed or riddled with bullets, but they cannot be humiliated either. Workers of my country, I have faith in Chile and its destiny. Other men will overcome this dark and bitter moment when treason seeks to prevail. Go forward knowing that, sooner rather than later, the great avenues will open again, where free men will walk to build a better society. Long live Chile, long live the people, long live the workers. These are my last words, and I'm certain that my sacrifice will not be in vain. I'm certain that, at the very least, it will be a moral lesson that will punish felony, cowardice, and treason. And again, those are the last words of Salvador Allende before he was assassinated September 11th, 1973, by a CIA-sponsored and backed military coup. With that, let's go ahead and close out the show. I'm going to read you the activist calendar real quick. Again, big thanks to all y'all for listening. September 13th, on Facebook, Maggie Fair Institute is going to exposing predictive policing. September 13th, 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. It's basically a info share. You can find it, look it up on Facebook, Facebook info share exposing predictive policing. Excuse me. Other events we've got coming up this week. Over at over at 2nd Street Park. Oh no, that's in Maine. Sorry, I was about to read a very far away event on September 15th. Over at the First Baptist Church of Kalamazoo, there's going to be a fundraiser for Sahida Nadim. If you don't know, she has been kind of stuck, taking sanctuary at the 1st Congressional UCC for the better part of a year and a half because ICE is out there. That event is going to be from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on Sunday, September 15th. On Monday, September 16th, a couple of events going on. Over at the Vine Neighborhood Association, the Vine Events Planning Session, that's going to be from 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. At Monday, September 16th, there's also going to be a community-driven storytelling event from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Kalamazoo Nonprofit Advocacy Coalition. That is... basically, it's going to be a fundraiser as well, but it's also kind of a chance for the community to really, listen to one another. I'd highly recommend it. That's going to be 315 West Michigan Avenue over at the KNAC. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and close out the show. I want to thank all of y'all for listening. Again, if you like what you heard, you can find us at the Hoodrat Strategist radio program on Facebook. Also, we upload our episodes onto YouTube, usually by the following morning. Until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.